We need to invest in our services, we need to invest in our infrastructure, and that actually does create a much more stable economy.
Local authority pipelines have really slowed down, and there's a number of factors that won't be reversed by this budget, and they're basically interest rates and inflation of construction materials.
The past few governments we've had over the past 14 years, more what they won't do. We won't be building HS2. Don't talk about housing, getting rid of housing targets. It is refreshing to sort of turn the tables on that. And I think having that clear vision can only bring confidence and stability in the sector. So I'm Jay Morton, I'm a director of Bell Phillips Architects, and I also have a podcast called Architects for Change, which is seeking to bridge the gap between architecture and politics, because I think, as I say in my intro, I am a bit of a political geek. I have actually stood for an election before, and it sort of came about as seeing how politics really influences the both environment and architecture, and likewise the other way. So it's about bringing those two things together.
Amazing. Your intro has actually covered 2 or 3 of my first questions. But so as an extension of the introduction, this is a joint episode. So we're going to do half urban forecast.
Is this podsest? What's the word for it, do we think?
Podsest.
Pod incest?
Oh.
Podsest.
What a horrible concept. Yes, it is. We've started it. No, so this is a collaboration, a podcast collaboration. And so we're going to do a bit of me interviewing you, and then we're going to switch it around and we're going to broadcast it on both streams. So
sounds great.
I'm Oliver Lowrie, director of Lowrie Architects. So there's 2 architects in the podcast. It's the first for me, definitely. And our podcast is called Urban Forecast, and it similarly deals with the sort of grey area between politics, planning, and architecture, and tries to cover kind of the magic ingredients that go into good placemaking and good kind of urban regeneration. So it's about the future of cities. So, Jay, thank you so much for coming in.
No problem.
And so I'd like to start, as we do with all of our episodes, with your background. So for you particularly, this is kind of your background of why you wanted to go into architecture originally, but also then why you wanted to go into politics.
Okay. Yeah. So architecture, I suppose it was sort of accidental, because I actually was all ready to pack my bags and go to Bristol and do biochemistry, or natural sciences as the course was, but didn't actually want to leave that design and creativity behind. So I guess, again, it's about merging 2 things together, which is why I ended up going to taking a year out, studying architecture, studying at the Bartlett for both part 1 and part 2. And then, as everyone in part 1, hit by a recession. So again, experiencing the effects of what's happening in the wider world and politics on your daily life. And then I got really involved in the housing crisis and campaigning for groups like Priced Out and Generation Rent. And then also became a member of the Fabian Society, which is, if anyone knows, is one of the oldest left-wing think tanks. But then the Fabian Women's Network has this thing called the Fabian Women's Mentoring Scheme, which it was advertised and I was a member. So I signed up and didn't think anything of it, and then ended up being in cohort 5, which has actually opened up to me like this most amazing network of women. It's now on, I think, cohort 13. So every cohort every year has this amazing group of women that are all doing amazing things. And the whole point of doing the scheme was for anyone who was interested in getting involved in public life. And to me, it wasn't necessarily about wanting to get involved in politics, but my role as an architect is quite public facing. And also by this point, I'd started working at Bell Phillips Architects, where a lot of our projects were with local authorities. So again, it's that working with local authorities, building a lot of affordable housing, and at the same time doing stuff with Generation Rent and Priced Out. So it was all sort of came together as one big interest. And I think the Fabian Women's Mentoring Scheme throughout that year, it was basically, you had like events, these training events, media training, public speaking training. We went on these away weekends. We went to Brussels, got exposed to like at the time, the European Parliament. This was before Brexit. We had days in the Shadow Cabinet Office. So it just actually exposed you to all these spaces that then, when a few years later in 2019, there was the Labour Party put out an email saying, these are all the seats don't have candidates. Fill out this form if you're interested. I put Chichester and Bognor down, which is where I'm from. But because I'd had that exposure, it didn't seem like an unrealistic thing to do. And I think it's actually really, really important, whatever anyone wants to get involved in, whether it's architecture or politics, that exposure to the people and the places and the spaces, so that you don't have that imposter syndrome, that you realise that something's possible. So I filled out the form, and then November came, or October came, the election had been called, and I thought nothing of it, and then had a phone call from Chichester Labour Party saying, can you come to Chichester tomorrow because you're the candidate? And that was that.
Wow.
But obviously I didn't win, but it was really, really good exposure.
So you were the candidate?
Yes.
And how long did you have to campaign for?
Well, luckily it was a snap election, so it was sort of 6 weeks of working.
That's
and
still quite a lot for having a job at the same time. It was still quite long,
and I had a very small child. My son was only had only just turned a year, so it was a lot all in one go. But a bit of a whirlwind. But then again, it just makes you realise what is possible. But Chichester's a very conservative area, and would never have picked.
Is that why you picked it? Because you knew?
Well, no, it was basically
Labour was never going to win.
Well, no, it was more because of the email that went out. It was that these are the seats that don't have candidates, and the seats by that point that didn't have candidates were basically non-battlegrounds or unwinnable. So it was a really good.
And what was your takeaway sort of learning experience from that?
I guess in counteract to our profession, which we are massive perfectionists, and you do have to be a perfectionist, but I think when you're exposed to something like that, that's so fast paced, you have to just get ideas, quotes, comments, leaflets, whatever it is, things have to get out the door. So it was actually that training on responding to things without it being perfect. The sort of like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
You have to just, if somebody wants a response to something, or if you need to write something, a quote or an article, you can't wait. It has to go out right that second. So I think it exposed you to that, and more public speaking and that sort of thing, and also the exposure to people's daily lives. You almost kind of need therapy after it, because the amount of people that ring you up, come up, talk to you in the street and tell you all of their issues is quite amazing as well. And it really puts everything into perspective, that everything that we do on a political level, how that actually affects people's lives.
Did it change you as a designer, do you think?
Yes, and I think also that I suppose we were already doing a lot of work with community-led schemes and with local authorities, but I think that engagement with local communities and how you actually interact with people on different levels, I think it helps with that as well. Because I think, and we always find in practice, we don't believe in just turning up and having some boards for people to look at. It's actually finding different ways to engage with different communities, people of different ages. You need to be a bit more bespoke. And there's always one thing that you can actually really engage with someone on, and really can make them click and make them want to listen to you. And I guess that works on both sides.
And so obviously the Labour Party's changed quite significantly from 2019 to now. You're still a member. Yes,
I'm very much. I am the Fabian Society is quite sort of centre is a centre-left organisation, and that's how I got into the Labour Party in the first place. So yes, no, I'm still very much a member.
And we had Rachel Reeves' first budget yesterday. Obviously, it won't be yesterday when this goes out, but I think, what's your sort of takeaway in terms of what you think the headline impacts will be, both on the industry and then on the kind of the built environment?
Well, I think what I found is it's quite refreshing to have a government that is very much it's even in all their rhetoric. It's fixing the foundations, building Britain, fixing the wrongs of the past. So it's very much a sort of construction led, and I think it is really refreshing to have that focus on building. So whilst obviously there are wobbles and moans in the media about certain things, and from different from business, but actually setting out that really clear vision that this is a government that wants to build and wants to invest in infrastructure and invest in housing, I think for our industry is really, really important. And it sort of, I think, brings in an element of confidence. And it's quite refreshing, because I think we've had it's felt over the past few governments we've had over the past 14 years, more what they won't do. We won't be building HS2. They don't talk about housing, getting rid of housing targets. Obviously, they don't want to push building because a lot of their voters lived in areas where they don't want to see anything happen. So it is refreshing to sort of turn the tables on that. And I think having that clear vision can only bring confidence and stability in the sector, which I think is really important. And we noticed it when we were at UK, I don't know if you were at UK Reef, but when the election was announced, just with this whole feeling was just completely different overnight of like, oh, okay, maybe we can start doing some stuff again.
But I usually go to the Labour Party conference, and I went again this year.
Oh yeah, we met the first time, I think, at a year ago, yeah.
And the first time that we met was pre-election.
Yes.
And it felt more positive than once they'd actually won this year. This year they'd won the election.
Yes.
And they had the Labour Party conference, and it felt quite muted.
Yes, and I mean, I went to everything to do with housing, so I think the fact that there was
everything to do with housing that I went to was like, great, brilliant. How are we going to do it? How? That is the big question. Don't tell me we're going to do it. Tell me how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I think that is the big one, the how, and I think again with the budget is, I mean, my question is it enough? So. Okay, great. 500 million for social housing projects. When you actually work that out, that's not that many homes at all.
Less than one additional planner per local authority.
Yeah,
300 new planners.
And if you think about the backlog, so I think there is the thing. There's the question of how, and then there is now the question of is it enough? And the other thing that I think was missed, which I'm quite disappointed on, is. I suppose it's not missed, but I think it's been missed the whole time, since talking about the whole building programme, is actually that understanding of embodied carbon and how that links back to our net zero goals. Because we talk about innovation, and they did talk about carbon capture, but they haven't made that link between you're going to build 1.5 million homes. How much embodied carbon is that actually going to be? So how do we actually innovate the construction sector? And I don't think that's there yet.
And no real, I thought, recognition of retrofit and the importance that retrofit is going to have play 80% of the buildings that we need for the future already here.
Yeah, utilising what we have.
Nothing in the budget yesterday about trying to encourage retrofit through maybe, realigning VAT. I thought that was an opportunity, bit of an open goal missed.
Yeah, and it's like you say, it's an easy one, isn't it? And actually, it's utilising the buildings that we have and the housing stock that we have. So yeah, I think there was a lot there, and I'm trying to remain confident that I feel that it will sort of spark more confidence in developers as a whole.
I don't know. I think there's a couple of things that won't spark confidence, like basically increasing capital gains tax. I think that's made a lot of investors and developers think, let's put my money in a different country. So that again feels like a real own goal when you're doing all this good. And then, the other side of it is to pledge money is one thing, but national government is pretty bad in the UK at spending money, or it's good at spending money, but it's bad at directing that money on things that actually give returns.
Yeah.
And I have to say, local authorities have, some of them are good, some of them are bad, right? You can't say they're all bad at spending money. Some of them are very good, but local authority pipelines have really slowed down. And there's a number of factors that won't be reversed by this budget, and they're basically interest rates and inflation of construction materials, and the fact that there's social housing bill
and skills as well.
Absence of skills, but even the ones like Be First and Southwark, where they actually have got the skills in house, they can't make their sites stack. And also, most of their budget's going to cover temporary housing, emergency housing, and adult social care. And you can plug that hole with some cash, which I think she did yesterday a little bit, but you can't reverse these macroeconomic trends with the budget. So that's why I come back to what tools, what leverage do you have? What tools have you got in your arsenal? And
I think, whilst there was the ability to keep 100% of right to buy receipts, but then if you're actually going to phase out right to buy, then that amount of money is actually not really going to be there.
Yeah.
But I think we do need to see
enough on the private sector. So it's like, great, let's chuck some money at the public sector. Brilliant. Well, that may or may not trickle through. It certainly won't trickle through to me, because we never end up working for local authorities because the procurement doesn't favour practices like ours. But for us, the private sector is a more effective way of delivering housing. So, and there was nothing really in the budget yesterday that I would think would encourage investors or developers. In fact, I think probably the reverse when you look at increasing capital gains tax.
Yes and no, but I think just by setting out the vision that this is a government that wants to see house building already is a step in the right direction compared to what we've had before. And I think part of the big issue of what we've had over the past few years is actually the sort of flip-flopping as well. Again, I think in a way, like if everybody knows what the taxation is going to, because we do need more. I mean, this is my sort of lefty politics coming into play. You know, we need to invest in our services. We need to invest in our infrastructure, and that actually does create a much more stable economy. Because then, I mean, the whole point about politics not getting involved in your daily lives, actually, politics getting involved in your daily lives is when you can't get a doctor's appointment, and so you're having to then maybe get private healthcare and do all that stuff, not being able to get a bus. Actually, with things that if all the sort of basics are just working and you don't notice, then we can actually get, then you can actually start living your life and investing in the country, and businesses can be operating. But I think by not having this flip-flopping and we have a clear vision, I think that in itself provides stability. So whilst I do get your point about increasing taxation, might cause a bit of issue with investors and developers, but actually the biggest one is having an understanding of actually what the direction is, and that we're not going to be flip-flopping in the next 5 years, that there's a clearer vision. Because even things like putting projects, like we were talking before we started recording about, we were talking about Southwark and the Bakerloo line, that being pulled has caused a massive issue. You've got all of that land on the Old Kent Road that's not being developed, that should be, because the Bakerloo line got cut. And obviously there was the announcement of HS2 is now going to extend to Euston Station. And, that's a whole, again, chunk of land in central London that needs to be developed. And by HS2 not necessarily extending, makes people think, I'm not too bothered about buying that site and developing it. So that kind of flip-flopping causes big issues as well. So I think just having that clear direction, I think, is going to improve the built environment. The issue that I guess you probably is similar, as the construction sector is formed of a lot of SMEs and small businesses, so architects, engineers, consultants, small developers. The national insurance, if we can't actually employ, the cost of employment is going up, which I think might cause a bit of an issue, because if we can't employ people to do the work that we need to do, that might cause problems. I mean, for us, the bill is like the equivalent of one person, which is a lot, actually.
Yeah. What, the additional?
Yeah, I don't know what it is, how it is to you, probably similar. We just did a fact packet yesterday.
I don't really want to do the maths on this. I know it's
quite scary, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to move the dial, I don't think, massively. But I do think you're right. Big infrastructure projects, yes, they can incentivize investors to commit. But if you make other countries look more tempting, then they won't. There's only so much magnetism that
I suppose in terms of external investment. But there are a lot of businesses that are already here that want to continue investing in the UK as well.
But developers, when they set up SPVs, they might not pick the UK to be the place that the SPV is based. That's the conversations that definitely people are having in the industry.
I mean, and you have already seen, companies that have sort of started to pull out, but that was almost because of where we were before. So I think it's, if you can work out, where your investment is, what the taxation is going to be, there's not going to be any big surprises, then yes, I still think it makes the UK more attractive than it was before. So it's still better.
So the reason that I enjoy foraying into politics a little bit is not really the sort of the national government side of it. I think, it's nice to have an awareness, but the reason that we go to the Labour Party conferences is not to engage with Rachel Reeves. She wouldn't spend a lot of time with us, I think, even if I asked her. But for us, it's about local governments. And the reason that we go to the Labour Party conference year after year, even when it was Corbyn and it was all mad, is because when you're there, you can walk around and you can bump into Mo Bart, or you can bump into Darren Rodwell at the time. And these local authority leaders, they're primarily Labour in London, and they're all there. And I think they are the people that have more influence over the built environment than any other single politicians. I don't think MPs particularly have a huge impact on the built environment, but if you get
I think a lot of the new ones are passionate about they all want to have their thing, and a lot of them, housing is an issue in their constituency. So I think if we want to try and influence, and I think as a way of influence, like you say, the minister, they don't even have the time anyway to talk to anyone.
One MP has a tiny little office of a couple of people, whereas the leader of the, I take Brent as an example, Mobile, I think their annual budget's 2 billion. So he's got a lot of staff working for him. And if he sets a vision, which he does, of regeneration in the borough, or you can see the same in Morton Forest and the same in Barking and Dagenham, when there's alignment between politics, planning, and quite substantial budgets, then you get transformation.
Yeah, and vision.
So that's why, you need the vision, and you can see, over 10 years what can be done with that alignment. And so that's why we engage in politics, is for that, that local level, because I think that's where you see the greatest impact. Well, I don't think MPs have the ability to do that in the way that local leaders do.
No, I suppose there's different things. There's influencing your actual the actual built environment. I suppose the other thing is, because I've got this other thing I'm involved in called the Architects Action for Affordable Housing campaign. So if it's about sort of influencing policy at a government level, it does almost feel like the easy way, a way in is actually to target particularly the newer MPs that they're all trying to find their thing that they want to sort of, that's the thing they're going to do while they're in Parliament.
So is that what you're doing? You're lobbying new MPs with this affordable housing?
Yes, I mean, we have had meetings with MCHLG, and spoken to Matthew Pennick at conference a few times, which I think he probably doesn't ever want to see him again. So I was just I managed to ask a question in every single panel that he was on.
Same question?
No, different one every time. Always make sure there's a different question. He's incredibly busy, but actually a way of feeding into the wider debate and the conversation. I think newer MPs is probably a good way to go. So you were saying how you find the sort of impact on the built environment actually more impactful at a local level. And I guess, I mean, you aren't actually working with local authorities, but I guess in terms of the work that you're doing, it's still quite important to be engaging with those political leaders. Maybe can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we identified probably about 5 or 6 years ago that basically all planning applications, we were working on smaller schemes, and we were like, how do we get up to the next level of size of projects? And we kind of realised that you get any planning application over, say, 50 units in scale is political. And it doesn't matter what borough you're in London. I think probably if you're somewhere in, I don't know, I don't want to name anywhere, but there's certain areas where these can fly under the radar. We had 100 units consented through delegated powers in a place in the Midlands, but in London that would never happen. So these schemes are always political. They're always going to go to committee. They're going to be basketballs chucked around between different political groups. And, what we realised is that if we were going to, one of the ways that we could win larger jobs is to go out and make sure that we understood all the local authorities that we wanted to work in, who the people were and what their kind of vision was. And so we then actually worked with a political consultant that we employed to raise our profile in the boroughs that we wanted to work with in, so that if you take a place like Walton Forest, started with Jonathan Martin, who's head of inward investment, and then Justin, who's head of planning deputy head of planning, and tried to meet the politicians and the officers, so that you then had a really good understanding of the context of what they were trying to achieve. Because then you can advise your clients and go, well, look, this is what they want, and here's the kind of the win-win, right? If we come forward with a scheme that does this, and this, we know that they'll support maybe in a bit of extra height, or a bit more density, because it's going to hit their sustainable agenda or their placemaking or design quality, whatever it is. But you don't know that unless you've engaged with those politicians and senior officers to really try and understand their vision. So that's the bit that's fascinating for me, is that, you go to architecture school and you think you're going to be the one designing it, and then you realise this is a whole context, but it's largely political and economic. Well,
I suppose it goes back to the point that I say a lot, that people make places, and actually your local councillors, and they are very much embedded in the community. They are part of the community.
They understand it better than you do as a designer.
They understand it better than you do. They understand, I mean, when you actually see the work that councillors do, it's absolutely mind-blowing, the amount of, compared to what an MP does even, because the sort of, you still have to actually have a job at the same time.
Yeah.
And they are dealing with every single time, issues that they seem small, but they're big and they're really meaningful to that person who needs help. So they know everyone inside and out. So actually, when it comes to building buildings and engaging communities, they actually already know what's going to go, what might make something more palatable to someone. Because actually, sometimes it is a bit of a give and take, isn't it? I don't know if you find with projects that,
of course,
maybe if that project improves the outlook of that area, or if it can provide something for the local community, it's much more likely to go through. And this is why good design is important as well.
Yes, but also that if you don't understand that context and you haven't listened, and like listening can happen in loads of different ways. You were talking about, going out, trying to engage with the community, but the councillors are often doing that. They could be your advocate or your intermediary as well. So you can get, by engaging with them, lots of things that yes, you have to engage with the community itself, but like those people have been elected to be the spokespeople for that community. So engaging with them, understanding where the pain points are, as you say, how you can make this thing more palatable. We don't want to be dropping developments into communities that aren't wanted. And so, yes, engaging in that political process can help both sides come to a, engineering a kind of win-win. So yeah, that's the kind of politics that we get excited by. I think the power of it to shape places and transform places. And
so, you say that you do you go to the other conferences as well? No, just the Labour Party conference.
Well, in London it wouldn't be worth it because there's 32 London boroughs and 28 of them are Labour. And
it does seem, I found that it seems to be that the majority of boroughs that are actually building or pushing or have more building going through is actually it is the Labour boroughs as well, compared to the... I
think Wandsworth under Ravi was an exception, but there's just fewer Tory boroughs, so it's... In London.
And the predominant of your work is in London.
In London.
How do you much work outside of London as well?
We do a little bit, and we definitely don't get as involved in... Like, I would feel uncomfortable trying to... All of the stuff that I just said, I wouldn't apply if we were working on a Midlands project, because I just don't know the context well enough, and I haven't spent the time or invested in understanding the politics of somewhere outside of Birmingham. So I wouldn't take the same approach. But in London, we've spent time trying to understand the political context so we can try and use it to our benefit. And that's why most of our work is in London.
Yeah. I suppose this is the thing, again, going back to the budget and the house building programme, and going back to the ability for local authorities to actually drive housing, whether they're doing it themselves or in partnership with developers, but also having power and control over good placemaking in their area. And there is actually quite a big separation, because, like you say, everything goes to committee. Actually, local authorities do have a bit more control, whether they're building it themselves or a private developer. They have a bit more control over what is happening. And there is a big issue, I think, outside of London. And how do we improve that so that the quality of housing and the sort of control that local authorities have is better? I think
do we think committees are a good way of controlling the outcome of development? Some would definitely say that it isn't.
Yeah, and sometimes it is the loudest voice. But I guess it's maybe more than just committees. It's also the expertise as well. Yeah,
and I think it's a really interesting point. Like the amount of information that planners have to now go through. If you look at design access from its statement from even 15 years ago, it's often A4 written Word document saying, this is how you access the building and this is how we thought about the design. And now, the amount of reports that you've got, planners have to be experts in fire and in viability and all the stuff that they didn't used to have to consider. And that is one way of controlling the outcome of the planning process. And I think it's one that planners quite like. I don't mind it, really. It just needs to be better resourced. Yeah. We just need a few more people. And then this system that we've got, it's pretty good because it's like case by case, very bespoke. That's how you would get the highest quality design, is to have people every time really, really, really granular assessment of your proposal. But we've done some events with Nicholas Boyd-Smith from the Office for Place.
Yes.
And, his sort of attitude is, why do it like that? Like, why not set a certain amount of parameters?
So having more design codes.
Yes, he's an advocate of design codes.
Yeah.
So you spend the time and the money with the local community to come up with what you consider to be acceptable, and then you allow people to hit those. You can either his I don't want to necessarily put words in his mouth, but I believe that what he would say is there will be a standard way of doing it. But if you still want to do a 20-story tower that's made of glass, you can, but you would then not be able to do the shorter, quicker route. So there's design codes if you want to do something standard.
Yeah,
if you want to do non-standard, you could do.
Yeah, a few people have sort of said has put that in play or suggested that, and actually, if you and actually, if you've seen the Thomas Heatherwick Humanise campaign, I think that it's also a similar thing about buildings should also be. He uses the term "not boring,"
Yes.
which I mean, there's loads of other, I suppose, criticism of the Humanise campaign, but on the sort of basic level, it's basically saying all our buildings should be of the best quality and make everyone feel good.
Let's get him. Let's get Thomas. Come on, we'll get between the two of us. We'll tag this video of this clip
and say let's get Thomas, because I think I
to come and call us boring to our faces.
Yes, because the whole concept of and I think it's what we all as architects, we want to see the best buildings going up everywhere. Nicholas Boyd-Smith would say the same, and Thomas is saying the same in his way. But actually, how do we make that happen? And I think whether it's design codes, but that sort of idea that if something is of the best quality, you've used like the best architects, you will get through planning quicker than if you're trying to put forward a cheap, awful building that's not going to be good for anybody. I
don't think it's necessarily that happens. That's the problem, right? I don't advocate for design codes at all. I think the system that we've got is a good system as long as it's well resourced.
And that's the point. Planners need to have teeth. The planners need to have teeth, because there is the whole been a lot of chat about deregulation and deregulating the planning system, but I part of me is concerned about that, because like you're saying, they sometimes are the arbiters of quality only if they've got teeth, though.
They need to have teeth, they need to have good education, they need to be well resourced, and then same for the committee. And I think the committee should stop being asked, I think the framing of the question should be clearer. If you use AI now and you use ChatGPT, if you put in a very vague question, you get a really crap answer. If you put in a specific question, you get quite a good answer. And I think committees should be used the same way. The committee are there. They've been elected to be the advocates of the local community. So democracy needs to be played out in this way. But the questions should be directed in a very clear way so that they can give answers that are very clear. And at the moment, I feel like the committee is often used as a bit, people, I've been to committees where they're like, if somebody doesn't like a scheme or the committee have decided they're going to turn something down, they're like, ooh, can we think of another reason? So that we've got 6 reasons for refusal, so that if one of them fails, then we'll still manage to block it. And you're like, well, we haven't been asking the question the right way, have we? If we're allowing that to be the answer.
And again, it's what should they even be commenting on? Because I've had schemes where in committees, and it's like, well, if every single element of the roof doesn't have solar panels on it, then it's not sustainable. And again, it's like, actually, it's so much more.
But this is my point about politics, is that the first time the committee see the application, I don't think should be at the planning committee, right? I think they should be brought on the journey with you from the start. There should be a political consultant making sure that they're being engaged, and the local community being engaged, and the committee members feel that you're doing your job by engaging with ward councillors and briefing them in advance of the planning committee, and making sure the planners are aware of that, and ideally the leader of the council if that's appropriate, if it's of the correct size. And that, I think, is the way where you can protect the whole design development chain from losing money. Because if you get a big application turned down, you can be losing millions of pounds, and that is, for productivity, UK GDP productivity, that's wasted money. So I think that's why politics can be a great thing, because it can mitigate that risk, because everybody's brought along on the journey, and you're course correcting before you get to the planning committee.
And I suppose this is chap that I interviewed recently, Gil Penalosa. He used the term our role is to educate. So our role is to educate politicians, is to educate the client, educate the local community. Not saying this is how something could be, because also the education works the other way as well. But actually sometimes just saying, no, this is the better approach for the built environment, using obviously that makes me sound like I'm saying telling communities what it should be, but we are sort of educating each other along the way, and that's sort of part of what we're there to do, and also educate the clients to do the right thing as well, rather than just sort of pushing something forward in one way. It's sort of a bit more of a two-way. But he made the point, like, you get some designers and urban planners, maybe when they're working in other countries, will do something that they would never do in Europe or in the West, like building big towers without any sidewalks and without no place what's the word I'm saying, without people place design. because that's just what somebody who was rich enough to pay for wanted, but it's not necessarily the right thing. But actually,
well, like the pencil towers in New York.
Yeah, exactly.
So they are a result of design codes.
Yeah.
Because the rules were written in 1960 when it wasn't physically possible to design something that tall. What the rules are there, if you buy up a building next to you, you can have its airspace. So if you own two buildings next to each other, you can double up the airspace and build a tower that height. Nobody ever thought you could buy up 20 buildings around you, combine the airspace and end up with that absolutely mad
and then you've
tower.
ended up with...
But it's like this is why design codes are so dangerous, because there's loopholes there, right? Because you're not subjectively looking at every single case.
Yes, yeah.
And although I kind of admire them for their madness, I don't think you could really argue that they're high quality. They look bizarre.
So what we're saying is we need better education in the planning system. We as professionals need to be educating politicians and likewise
and
listening and working with local communities to sort of like push a better built environment going forward. A lot in your sort of his background, I did a little bit looking up onto you. You started out doing a lot of work, with more sustainable design. And how do you feel we are as an industry going forward? Do you feel that we're doing enough?
So I spent 10 years at Archetype, where they were real pioneers of sort of passive house, bringing the passive house movement to the UK. I think that as an industry, we're actually doing okay. Like, I think Archetype used to be an outlier, and now they're not. They're kind of in the middle of the pack, and not the middle of the pack. They're still ahead of lots of people, but definitely a lot of the world's caught up with what they were doing. I think for me, I know everybody says the built environment is a great contributor, but I think if you like sort of step back and zoom out, the world is pretty fucked. And I don't think we are, like, architects like to think that everything's always their fault. It's like the size of our egos, right? Every year, more and more oil is being extracted from the world. So today, on this day, there has never been more oil extracted from the earth on any day than there was the day before, right? So it's only going up.
I didn't know that fact, and that's really terrifying.
Which is really terrifying, because you're like, whether or not our industry is doing well, action needs to be taken globally, internationally. Like, us little industry of UK architects isn't going to move the dial either way. And I think actually we're doing okay, But we can always do more, but like the world,
I suppose maybe not just architecture, but do you think the construction industry as a whole, because I think I'm always of the view that I think we're not innovating in how we build. And going back to the budget, there wasn't really any conversation about that.
But if you just, how are you going to, with all of the new regulations around fire, it's making it harder and harder to use any natural materials, really. Unless you're designing pretty small buildings, you aren't using a lot of timber. It's certainly not structurally. Yes, that could be relooked at. Like, if you went to Paris and you tried to build a Part B compliant building or whatever, ESW1 compliant building, it would fail in France, because in France you have a certain amount of renewables you need to use in your building material.
So we're doing different things.
Totally different things. Yeah. We're going completely obsessed with fire and, whatever, has a reason. But the two conflict entirely. But
this is where I think, do we not need to come together? And I always use the term the same as the vaccine task force. Like, to get the COVID vaccine online, they literally jumped 10 years of research and they did all the same stuff. They just did it quicker because there was a focus. Is there not? Do we not need to have a focus on sort of testing new building methodologies, testing new details to get something that does work quicker, rather than
politically you're pushing against it's a very risky area to be pushing at anything to do with fire safety at the moment, isn't it? Because really, if you're going to truly look at sustainable materials, most of the stuff we're using now is like cement based, isn't it? It's like cementitious boards. Everything's basically cement board or block work. And I feel comfortable specifying those materials because I know that I'm not going to get sued later for them not being non-combustible. That's the mindset I used to have. Was exactly the opposite when I was working at Archetype. It was like, how can I make sure this is the most natural material that it possibly could be? How are you going to convince new or old MPs to look at this legislation that's come through as a result of Grenfell and unpick it? But
I suppose that's what I mean. I'm not necessarily saying it should just be the MP. I think, do we not need to, as an industry, invest in that innovation and testing, so that you know that
question
something
the
works.
legislation that we've got in place as well, because
And
I don't
exactly,
think it's very good
and
legislation
test that,
for
because
a
it's
number of
been
reasons.
going back to the sort of flip-flopping, it was sort of brought up quite quickly
Yeah.
for very good reason.
Yeah.
But again, that actually caused a bit of a stalling in the sector as well.
Massive.
We had that sort of not really understanding, and this goes back to, I guess, what we were saying at the beginning. Having just clear vision and stability is just gonna be helpful.
Yes.
No matter no matter whether how much tax we're paying or whatever it might be.
I think you're right. We should. So cross industry questioning of this legislation, not just in terms of specification of materials, but also the gateways and the fact that they don't seem to be, no schemes going through the gateway too.
Well, and again, there's not enough, going back to this, not just about funding planners, we need to have more people in the regulator, because there's not enough people.
Change the way you do it back to a similar way that we did it before. I actually think post-Grenfell, the initial changes they made for quite safe buildings at that point, and then this stuff now is just bureaucracy eating itself. I think it's a really good idea. But like, bring back this idea that specification of materials shouldn't just be about flammability; it should also be about the environment. Because 75 people died in Grenfell, or 76, but the whole planet is going to die if we don't think about the environment.
Again, like looking at what's happening in Spain right now, like we do need to be, it needs to have a focus, and
exactly.
And I think we could. I mean, if we had have continued where we were, the whole wasn't net zero homes, carbon neutral. No, yeah, it was net zero homes. The whole the policy that Gordon Brown brought into play, that then would have meant all homes were like net zero by 2016, and then David Cameron scrapped it in 2013, I think. That where we'd be now, that we would be so much more ahead of the game. Maybe we'd actually be making more products in the UK. I don't know, but we would be. I think we would be more ahead. And I think if we actually invested maybe in innovation in technology and construction now, that's another opportunity to grow sort of part of the sector in the economy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, yes, that needs to happen. I think the big things that move the dial are like larger conversations that aren't architecture. And I think, yes, that needs to be part of it. But I think actually like the kind of UK energy idea is a really good one.
Yeah.
Funding for the grid, like, the UK grid is probably the biggest way that you could save energy as a country would be like infrastructure investments in the national grid. I think that's the thing. I think that the bit that we've still got to squeeze out of our industry from getting where we are now to getting much better would be like a diminishing return. But yes, we should be doing it. We should be pushing at all of these levers that we can.
I mean, what we're doing is we won the William Sutton Prize, or we're one of the winners of the William Sutton Prize, on a proposal that, okay, everything tall is going to be concrete, fine. Everything below, I think we were saying 11 metres, should be made out of biomaterials. But it does make you wonder whether if you go down that approach, actually, as master plans, you'll actually be, in terms of your massing of a master plan, might be like, do everything that can be lower, everything can be high, just go a bit higher, because you're already putting loads of concrete in the ground. But actually, it's quite an interesting. We're looking at timber for structure, hemp for insulation, and then maybe stone or lime render. And we're working with Clarion now at sort of rolling that out into actually a real project, which is quite interesting and exciting. And actually, if we're looking out of London, a lot of housing that's going to be built out of London isn't necessarily going to be tall.
Yeah.
So if you look at places like where I'm from, Bognor, Chichester, South Coast, Sussex, a lot of those housing developments, they are houses or low 4-storey flats. So actually, there is a lot of that 1.5 million homes isn't necessarily going to be concrete towers. So then we should be just pushing the alternative. But the other issue is actually, I suppose, insurance and water, which people
you need to bring the insurers in on it. And I think like we've done some events recently around ESG funding and like the opportunities there, and everyone's getting very excited, and it is exciting. There are new funding streams available for buildings that can tick, these sort of category 8 and 9 green funds. But you've got to bring the insurers on board. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. And, their industry seems to be, I don't want to slag off insurers, but it's if it's not been done before, they don't want to do it. And so innovation is then obviously the antithesis of what insurers want to
And this is why, because they were saying we need that like innovation task force that is like product manufacturers, designers, insurers all coming together for that like shared vision. And I think that's
let's make it.
I was going to ask you, are you optimistic
Am
for the
I
future, for the
optimistic?
industry? And
I think that we've probably, given that the past 2 years have been pretty bad, it would be, and I hope it won't be, worse for the next, like how I feel is that the next 3 to 5 years will probably be okay, because the global economic headwinds might hopefully be better. Like, I don't think the Ukraine war was the thing that caused all that inflation, right? It was COVID and people pumping loads of money into the global economy. That it was always going to happen.
it's a lot of excess cash we're talking about. Yeah.
And so that hopefully will wear through the system, and we'll get back to slightly lower interest rates and slightly more consistent inflation, or lower inflation, lower interest rates, and we'll get a good 5 years. And I don't think anything that Labour do or don't do will actually change that massively, because that's just like, the world is just hopefully, subject to Trump not blowing it up, going to continue, and China not invading Taiwan. But even those things, I think, probably compared to the shock of COVID, are quite small things. So I'm hoping for 5 good, stable years. And the question that I've got back for you is, do you think that any of the things announced either in the updates to the NPPF or in yesterday's budget will create the environment in which 1.5 million homes can be built in the next 5 years?
That's a big...
I asked this to 2 Labour politicians yesterday, and neither were able to say quite yes.
I do think there is I would love to say yes. I think it is a step in the right direction.
I agree.
I think my comments on the budget, it sort of remain that big question: is it enough? Because I think that understanding of what it takes to build 1.5 million homes, maybe that's not quite there. Like you say, we do need more planners. We do need more builders. We need more skills. We need more builders.
Builders over 50.
We need so much more in the industry, and actually, I think just the fact that there is now a focus on real estate, housing, building, that makes me really, really, really positive. And I think that, like I said before, it is going to make for a much more stable environment for us to work in going forward. Whether we actually achieve the number of 1.5 million homes, I want to say yes, but I don't think it's going to be as easy as they think it is.
I agree. But a good positive note to finish on.
It is a good positive note to finish on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation and want another great podcast about real estate, investment management and development, then check out the People Property Place podcast, where Matthew Watts, founder of Rockbourne, speaks to the movers, shakers, innovators and leaders in the real estate industry.